The teller slid my paperwork back across the counter with one finger like it might be contagious and said it loud enough for the whole line to hear. Ma'am, this line's for real customers. I was 64 years old, 1 week into being a widow, and I had come down to the Scioto Valley Bank and Trust on Paint Street to close a checking account with $312 in it. What the girl behind the counter did not know, what nobody in that warm, bright lobby knew, was that the worn folder under my arm would end her branch, freeze every account in the building, and lift a quiet little theft up out of the floor of that bank where it had been resting for years. I wasn't only there to close an account, but I let her think I was. Her name tag said Kayla. She had not opened my file. She had looked at my coat, a gray wool thing Walt bought me at the Pennies in 1994, and at the cane I kept for icy mornings and did not really need indoors. And she had decided, the whole of me, totaled and closed out in under 3 seconds. The lobby smelled of radiator heat and toner, and the little dish of peppermints by the deposit slips that had been refilled by the same hands since the Carter administration. Everybody in Chillicothe banked here. My mother banked here. There were 6 people in the line behind me. The man 2 places back was tapping his phone against his leg. A young mother near the rope had a toddler going boneless against her knees. An ordinary Tuesday. The first Tuesday since we buried Walt out at the cemetery off Route 35, and I had stood in the cold and watched them lay my husband down. Somebody near the door laughed. Soft. The kind of laugh meant to be heard but not owned. I did not turn around. I had read my own statement in the car before I came in. 40 years of reading other people's numbers does something to your eyes that does not switch off. There was a line on that statement that did not belong. A service charge, $38 even, dated the day after I buried my husband, and the running balance printed underneath it was wrong by exactly that much. $38. I had it squared in my head before Kayla finished her sentence about real customers. Old reflex, never wrong. I just did not say it out loud. Not yet. I don't argue. I reconcile. I'd like to close an account, I said. Quiet, even. My husband passed. I'm settling what's ours. Something moved across Kayla's face, and it was not sympathy. It was relief. A closing. An easy one. A little old woman with a little old account who would sign where she was told and shuffle back out into the cold. Oh, honey, you don't even need to be standing in this line for that, she said. She smiled the way you smile at a child who has wandered into the wrong room. The little ones, we just take care of those for you. You don't drag yourself all the way down here for a couple $100. We'll just close the little ones for you, sweetheart, and mail you whatever's left. The little ones. She said it the way you say a thing you have said before. A thing with a worn groove down the middle of it. Sweetheart sat on the end of the sentence the same way. Smooth from handling. I have been called a great many things by people who outranked me on paper and nothing else. Sweetheart, in that lobby, on that morning, was not the worst of them, but I marked it. I mark things. It is the one habit a whole career left me that I cannot put down. Because here is the part Kayla could not read off my coat. I spent the back half of my life being handed other people's money and being trusted with it, to the cent, by people who never once thought to wonder whether I could be. A great deal of money. More zeros than anybody in that lobby would have guessed. I had signed my name on lines that mattered, lines that other people's whole futures hung from. And here was Kayla in her cardigan, certain to the bone that $312 was more than a woman like me could be trusted to handle. I'd rather do it here, I said. In person. And there's a posting on my statement I'd like corrected first. A posting. Her smile thinned. Ma'am, The system does the postings. It's automatic. It doesn't make mistakes. It made one on the third line, I said. $38, dated the 11th, the day after the funeral. The balance under it is off by the same. You can keep the 38 if it's a fee you can name. I'd just like it named. She blinked at me. Then she did the thing I have watched bored people do for 40 years when a number frightens them. She went looking for somebody else to hand me to. "Let me get Dale," she said. She did not get Dale right away. She leaned back toward a glass-walled office behind the teller line and said something low, and a man inside it lifted his head. Mid-50s, soft in the middle, in a better suit than a branch this size pays for. There was a brass plate on his desk. From where I stood, I could read the first name on it, Dale, and the kind of title underneath it that means a man visits 4 branches and is loved at none of them. He held my eye for 1/2 of 1 second through the glass. Then he smiled and came out drying his hands on nothing, the way men do when they are getting ready to be reasonable at you. "Mrs. Vance." He read it off the folder tab under my arm, upside down, quick. He was good at that, reading things upside down and fast, and I filed that away too. Dale Ostrander, District Operations. "I'm so sorry for your loss. Walt was a fixture in here. 40 years, my goodness." He knew Walt's name without looking. He knew the 40 years. For a man who visited 4 branches, he knew my dead husband's banking history awfully well. "Thank you," I said. "Here's what we'll do." He said it gently, the way you talk a cat down off a counter. "You've had a hard week. You don't need paperwork today. These small accounts, the dormant ones, they're more trouble to keep open than they're worth. All those little fees nibbling away at them. Let us close it on our end. Clean, no charge. Kayla'll print you a form, you sign 1 line, and you go home and rest. We take care of our own here, Mrs. Vance. We take care of the little ones." There it was again. The little ones. 2 different mouths, the same exact words, the same worn groove. You do not say a thing that's smooth by accident. You say it that smooth because somebody taught you to say it, and you have said it 100 times, to 100 tired people in gray coats who signed the 1 line and went home to rest. I looked at the form Kayla was already printing. I looked at Dale Ostrander's kind, reasonable face, and I thought about my husband. Walt Vance kept books for the railroad for 31 years. He could find a penny in a haystack of dollars, and he could not sleep until he did. For as long as I had known him, he had kept this one account open at this one bank, and he had kept exactly $312 in it. Never more, never less. When the interest crept it up a dime, he would drive down to Paint Street and pull the dime back out, and he would never once tell me why. I used to tease him about it. $312, I would say, our big secret fortune. He would just smile and say, "That one stays open, Mo. Whatever else closes, that one stays open." I did not understand it then. I understood it now about as well as you understand a shape in a dark room, which is to say, I knew it was there, and I knew it had edges. Under my arm was the folder Walt kept. Our folder. 40 years of this bank, every statement, every notice, in his small square hand, and clipped inside the front cover, an envelope. Cream-colored, sealed, my name on the front in his pencil. Below my name he had written 4 words and underlined them once. "Don't open until they say no." I had carried that envelope into the bank that morning and I had not opened it because they had not said no. Not yet. They had said sweetheart. They had said the little ones. They had said let us take care of it. None of that is no. No has a particular sound, and I was waiting to hear it. "I think I'll keep it open a little longer," I said, "and I'll take a corrected statement for the $38 when you have a minute." The kindness went out of Dale Ostrander's face for about as long as it takes a cloud to cross the sun. Then it came back, warmer than before, which is exactly how I knew I had touched something. Of course, he said. No rush at all. Tell you what, leave it with us. Come back when you're feeling stronger. We'll have it all squared away, and you won't have to lift a finger. These things sit just fine. Nobody's in a hurry but you, Mrs. Vance. Nobody's in a hurry but you. He meant it to sound like comfort. It landed like a door being held open for me to leave through. Kayla slid the unsigned form back into a folder. The man with the phone sighed again behind me. Dale walked me 4 steps toward the door, with his hand not quite touching my back. Thanked me again for Walt. Told me to drive safe, and was already turning toward the glass office before I reached the vestibule. I stepped out onto Paint Street. The cold came up off the Scioto and went straight through the gray wool coat. Across the square, the diner sign was lit, and the courthouse clock read 10:15. I stood on the sidewalk a moment with Walt's folder held against my chest, and through the cardboard I could feel the small, stiff rectangle of that sealed envelope. They had not said no, not in a word. But I had banked on Paint Street for 40 years, and I knew the sound of a place deciding to make a problem disappear. I had heard it that morning, under the sweetheart, and the take care of our own, plain as a coin dropped on tile. I did not open the envelope on the sidewalk. I drove home first. There was something I needed to spread out on the kitchen table before I let my husband have the last word. The house was colder than I had left it, the way a house gets when the person who used to be waiting in it is not waiting there anymore. I hung the gray coat on the hook by the back door, where it had hung for 30 years, and I stood in my own kitchen a minute with my keys in my hand, listening to a quiet that did not used to be there. Walt and I did the books on Sunday nights. That was the arrangement, going back to before we had anything worth the word. He would clear the supper dishes, and I would wipe the table down, and he would bring the shoebox, and the long green-shaded lamp would come on over the middle of the table and we would sit. He had an adding machine, an old beige one with a crank of paper tape that he refused to replace because the new ones did not feel honest under his fingers. He used to say a number you could not hear, print was a number somebody could move on you. I used to tell him he was a superstitious old man. He used to tell me I was the only auditor in Ohio who believed in ghosts, and I would tell him I did not believe in ghosts. I believed in carbon copies, and he would laugh that low laugh and pull the tape, and we would go on. I turned the lamp on. It was the middle of a Tuesday morning, and I turned the supper lamp on because some part of me needed the light to be in the right place before I started. Then I set Walt's folder down on the table, and I opened it, and I began to do the only thing I have ever truly known how to do when the floor goes out from under me. I reconciled. I am not going to pretend to you that I am a brave woman. I am a careful one. There is a difference, and the difference is most of my life. I spent a long career being handed stacks of other people's money on paper and being asked one question, only ever the one question: does it balance? Not is it fair? Not is it kind? Does it balance? I got very good at the only question they ever asked me, and I got good at it because I noticed early that money does not disappear. Money is the most obedient thing there is. It goes exactly where it is sent. When it seems to vanish, it has not vanished. Somebody has sent it somewhere and is hoping you are too tired or too polite to follow it. Most people are. That is the whole trick. The whole trick is that they are counting on your grief or your manners or your gray coat. I don't argue, I reconcile. So I laid out 40 years of the Scioto Valley Bank and Trust on my kitchen table, and I followed the money. Walt had kept every statement. Of course he had. They were in order, oldest at the back, each year held with the same brand of paper clip, and the clips themselves were sorted by decade in an old peppermint tin, because that was the kind of man I married. I started with the account they wanted to close. $312. Our big secret fortune, the one I used to tease him about, the one he would drive down to Paint Street to trim a dime off of whenever the interest nudged it up. And here is what I found, reading it the way I was trained to read it, which is to say, reading the dates and not the dollars. That account was never dormant. A bank will tell you an account goes dormant, goes to sleep, when nobody touches it for a long stretch, and once it is asleep, they can charge it little fees for being asleep, and the fees eat it down. And a sleeping account that has been eaten down to nothing is the easiest thing in the world to close. Nobody complains. There is nothing left to complain about. That is the natural death they want for an account, and a great many accounts die that natural death every year, and no one ever asks a single question, because the holder is old, or the holder is gone, and who is going to drive down to Paint Street over a sleeping account with $11 in it? Walt would not let it sleep. Every 11 months, like a man winding a clock he did not want to stop, he had touched it. A dime in. A week later, a dime out. Small, regular, deliberate, right up against the edge of the window where a bank starts calling an account dormant, and never once over that edge. For 31 years. I sat there with the statements fanned out under the green lamp, and I saw my husband's hand reaching out every 11 months to tap a sleeping thing and keep it awake. And I did not understand yet why, but I understood that it was on purpose, and that a man does not do a thing on purpose every 11 months for 31 years for no reason. Then I found the $38, not just the one on my statement from the day after the funeral. Once I knew the shape of it, I went back, and there were others, scattered across the years but thicker lately. Small service charges with names on them I did not recognize. Codes, the kind of posting a tired person glances past. 38 here, 38 there. Fees that appeared, and then, a statement or two later, an account number that simply stopped. No closing balance mailed anywhere I could see. Just a number that had been alive, and then was a fee, and then was gone. I want to tell you my hands were steady. They were. That is the part that frightened me a little, sitting in my own kitchen. My hands were perfectly steady, because the hands knew this work. And the work was the same work it had always been. And the only new thing was that this time the money that had wandered off belonged to people I had buried alongside. Because I knew some of those numbers. Not the digits, the lives. I had been sitting in pews in this town for 40 years. I knew whose funeral came in which spring. That is when I picked up the envelope. It was still clipped inside the front cover where Walt had left it, cream-colored, my name across the front in his pencil, and underneath my name the 4 words he had pressed hard enough to dent the paper. Don't open until they say no. I had carried it into that bank that morning, telling myself they had not said no. They had said, "Sweetheart." They had said the little ones. They had said, "Leave it with us and come back when you are stronger, and nobody is in a hurry but you." And I had stood on Paint Street in the cold telling myself none of that was a no. Sitting at my own table, I finally understood my husband had not meant a spoken no. Walt knew these people. He knew they would never once say the word. He knew it would come to me dressed as kindness, with a peppermint dish and a form to sign, and a hand not quite touching my back, walking me to the door. That was the no. The no was the form sliding back into the folder unsigned and unbothered. The no was a whole warm lobby deciding that a woman in a gray coat would go home and rest and never follow the money. They had said no to me at 20 past 10 that morning. I had just been raised too polite to hear it. I opened the envelope. His handwriting, small and square and certain. The hand that had filled 40 years of ledgers for the railroad and never once been off by a scent that he did not hunt down before he slept. If you are reading this, Mo, then they finally tried it on you, and I am not there to stand next to you while they do, and I am sorrier about that than about anything. So let me stand next to you this way instead. I sat down. I had not realized I was standing. You remember Jean. You remember when Jean passed and Ruth Henderson could not make heads or tails of the bank afterward, and she told us at the visitation that they had been so good to her down there. They had just closed the little accounts for her, so she would not have to worry herself. You remember you thought that was kind. I did too for about a year. Then I started keeping the tape. I knew the name before he finished writing it. Ruth Henderson. I had sat 3 rows behind her at Jean's service. I had brought a casserole to that house. She had told me the same thing she told Walt, almost the same words. How good they had been, how they had just taken care of the little ones for her so she would not have to think about it. And I had patted her hand and thought, what a mercy. Walt's letter went on. He had written down names. Not many. He was careful. He did not have the run of their files. He was only a customer with a good memory and a habit of reading the obituary page and then reading his own statements. But he had matched what he could: a name, a season, an account that went quiet right after a graveside, a string of little fees, and then nothing. 5 of them he was sure enough of to write down. Every one of them a widow or an old man living alone. Every one of them someone who had been told, gently, by someone they trusted, not to worry about the little ones. It was never about us, Mo. We never had enough in that account to be worth their trouble, and that is exactly why I kept it. I kept it so that when they finally reached for it, they would be reaching for the wrong account in front of the wrong woman. You were always covered. You have been covered since before I knew you, by the work you did, and the name on the file you keep telling me to throw out. I never threw it out. I tied our little account to it on purpose years ago, with a phone call you do not know I made and a form you do not know I signed, so that the day anyone tried to sweep it under, the sweep would not stay quiet. It would ring a bell in a building a long way from Paint Street. I do not understand banks the way you understand them, but I understood Ruth Henderson's face at that visitation. So here is all I am asking. Do not argue with them, Mo. You never do. Just let them do it. Let them reach for the little one in front of everybody. And then let them read the file. You were always covered. Let them read it. Then there was a space, and under the space, smaller, the way a man writes a thing he is not sure he should send. I balanced everything I ever touched except the years I should have spent telling you what you already are. Reconcile this one for me. I know you will. You always do. I do not cry easily. I did not cry then. I sat under the green lamp my husband used to sit under, and I read his hand twice more, and I let the kitchen be quiet around me. And then I did the thing he asked, because it was also the thing I am. I reconciled. I took the 5 names and I laid them against 40 years of dates, and they fit. They fit the way a key fits, with that small, ugly certainty. The fees came after the funerals. The accounts went quiet in the season after the grief. The pattern was not loud. Whoever built it had been careful, almost as careful as Walt. Careful the way a person is when they are not stealing from strangers but from neighbors, and need to be able to keep saying it was a kindness. Little ones. We just closed the little ones for you, sweetheart. 2 different mouths that morning, the teller and the district man. The very same words worn down to the very same groove, because somebody had taught them both to say it. You do not teach 2 people the same gentle sentence by accident. You teach it because it works. You teach it because a soft word and a sad season will close more accounts than any fee ever could. I understood, sitting there, that I was not the first widow to carry a folder into that lobby. I was only the first one carrying that folder. I put the statements back in order, oldest at the back, the way he kept them. I clipped Walt's letter to the front where the envelope had been. I did not call anyone. I did not telephone the bank, or write a letter, or look up a number for some office in a faraway building, though I knew, more or less, which building Walt's bell would ring in, and I knew that ringing it from my kitchen in a careful, private, ladylike way would let them close ranks and clean it up and walk Ruth Henderson to the door 100 more times. No, he had told me how he wanted it reconciled, in front of everybody. Let them reach. Let them read it. So I would give them the chance to do exactly what they had been doing for years. I would go back to the Scioto Valley Bank and Trust on Paint Street, and I would go on a busy morning, with the line full and the peppermint dish full and the radiators ticking, and I would set my little account in front of them one more time, and I would let them perform the kindness they had performed on every grieving soul in this county who never thought to follow the money. And this time, someone was going to follow it. I slept that night better than I had since the funeral, which I will not try to explain to you. In the morning, I put on the gray coat again because it was the coat they had already decided about, and I wanted them to decide the same wrong thing twice. I put Walt's folder under my arm. I drove back down toward the courthouse square with the diner sign coming up bright through the cold and the clock on the courthouse not yet to 9, and I parked across from the bank, and I sat a moment with my hands on the wheel. Then I picked up the folder, and I went in to let them say no out loud, where the whole room could hear it. The bell over the door was brass and older than my marriage, and it rang the same flat note it had rung for 40 years when I pushed in out of the Paint Street cold, and the warmth of the lobby came up around me like a held breath. I had chosen the hour on purpose. 9:15 on a Wednesday, the courthouse square just filling, the diner across the way already loud behind its fogged glass, and inside the Scioto Valley Bank and Trust. The line ran 6 deep with the ordinary morning business of a small town. A farmer in a seed cap, 2 women from the school board with a zippered deposit bag between them, a young father bouncing a baby against his shoulder while he waited his turn. The radiators ticked along the wainscoting the way they always ticked, and the peppermint dish sat full on the counter, and the little flag stood in its holder beside the framed photographs of the men who had founded the place 100 years ago, and every bit of it was exactly as warm and exactly as kind as it had been the morning they laughed me out the door. I wanted it that way. I wanted a room full of witnesses who had no notion they were witnesses to anything. I took my place at the back of the line with Walt's folder flat under my arm, and I waited, and I did not feel frail, though I am quite sure I looked it. The line moved the way bank lines move, in small, patient lurches, and I used the time the way I always use time in a room full of money. I watched. There were 2 windows open. At the first stood an older clerk named Bernice, who had been there nearly as long as I had been a customer. And at the second stood the young woman from before, Kayla, with her hair pulled back hard and her nails the color of a fire engine, snapping a stick of gum slow behind her teeth. I watched her work 2 customers through while I stood in line, and I watched the thing I had come to see, which was not anything she did wrong with a deposit. It was the way she leaned forward and softened her whole face whenever the customer in front of her was old. The school board women got brisk efficiency. The farmer got a nod. But when a stooped man in a Korea veteran cap came up with a passbook, the gum stopped and the voice went to Honey, and I heard her say, leaning in, that he shouldn't trouble himself driving down here every month, that they could just take care of the small things for him so he wouldn't have to worry. And I watched him nod the grateful nod of a man being handled by someone kind, and I thought, there it is. That is the groove, worn smooth from use. Then it was my turn, and the little stand said, "Next window, please." And the next window was hers. I will tell you that she knew me. I saw it cross her face, the flicker of the woman who had been in here a week ago and made a small scene by simply not leaving fast enough. And I saw her decide to be patient with me the way you decide to be patient with weather. I set my paperwork on the marble, the same closure slip from before, the one for the account with $312 in it, smoothed flat, and on top of it Walt's folder, worn soft at the corners, the cardboard gone the color of weak tea. "Good morning," I said. "I've come back to settle the little account, like you suggested." Something eased in her shoulders. I had said the magic words, the ones that meant this would be quick and this would be easy, and the gray coat would be gone by the time the baby in the back started fussing. "Oh, good for you, sweetheart," she said, and she pulled the slip toward her and reached under the counter for the form, and her voice went to that same honey I had watched her pour on the man in the Korea cap. "See, this is so much easier. We'll just close the little one out for you, and you won't have to think about it anymore. That's all anybody wants, right? Is to not have to think about it." "That's all anybody wants," I agreed. "I want you to notice what I did not do. I did not tell her that an account does not need to be thought about to be left alone. I did not tell her that the easiest account in the world to leave open is one with $312 in it that costs the bank nothing and bothers no one. I did not argue a single point with her because I have learned across a long life that arguing is the sound a person makes while they are losing, and I had not come there to lose. I don't argue, I reconcile. So I let her slide the closure form around to face me, and I let her uncap the pen and lay it on the marble, pointing at the signature line the way you point a fork at a child's plate. And I folded my hands on top of Walt's folder, and I waited. That was when the office door at the side of the lobby opened, and the district man came out, and the air in the place changed in a way that only I seemed to feel. His name was Dale Ostrander, and I had met him exactly once, on the morning of the funeral week, when he had come gliding out to walk me to the door with his hand not quite touching my back, and he came gliding out now the same way, because a teller closing a small account does not summon a district operations manager, but a familiar gray coat at the window apparently did. He was a smooth, heavy, pleasant man, in his middle 50s, with a tie the color of a ripe plum, and he wore the kind of smile that has been practiced in a mirror until it costs nothing to put on. He came to Kayla's shoulder and looked down at my paperwork and recognized me, and the smile widened. But I was watching his hands, because hands tell the truth that faces are paid to hide. His hands were not smooth. He set his fingertips on the edge of the counter, and then took them off, and then set them down again, and there was a small sheen at his temple that the warm lobby alone did not explain, and I thought, with the flat, private certainty of a woman who has spent 40 years reading what people do instead of what people say, "You are afraid of this little account." I did not know yet how afraid. I knew only that a $300 closure does not bring sweat to a man's temple, and that whatever did was standing on my side of the counter inside a soft brown folder. "Mrs. Vance," he said warmly, "I'm so glad you came back in. We do worry about our seniors trying to manage all these little details alone." He turned the closure form a half inch, squaring it, a man tidying a thing he wanted gone. "Kayla, let's not even charge Mrs. Vance the closing fee. We'll just take care of the little one for her. It's the least we can do." There it was again. The little one. The very phrase out of a second mouth, worn to the exact same groove. He did not know that the night before I had sat under my supper lamp and matched that phrase to 5 graves. He thought he was being heard by a tired widow. He was being heard by the only auditor in the county who had brought the tape. "That's very kind," I said. "Before I sign, I wonder if I might trouble you for one thing. An account this old, 40 years, I'd feel better having the closure witnessed properly by the branch manager. My Walt was particular about that sort of thing. He'd want it done right." I let my voice do the thing my voice does without my asking any more. The small apologetic waver of an old woman making a fussy request. Would that be a terrible bother? I watched it land on Dale Ostrander, and I watched him have nowhere to put it. In a quiet office, he could have told me the manager was out, was busy, was unnecessary. But there were 6 people in the line behind me, and the school board women were close enough to hear, and the whole warm lobby had idly turned its attention, the way a room does, when an old woman invokes her dead husband, and a district manager who refuses a grieving widow. The simple dignity of a witness. In front of the town is a district manager with a problem he cannot afford. So the smile held, and the eyes did not, and he said, of course, absolutely." And he half turned and called across the lobby, in a voice pitched a notch too high, for Marcus. Marcus Hale was the branch manager, a lean, quiet man near 40, with reading glasses pushed up into his hair, the sort who keeps the place running and lets the district man take the photographs. He had been at the far desk with a couple signing for a car loan, and he came over wiping his hand on his trouser leg, glancing between Ostrander and the old woman in the gray coat, reading the small weather of his own boss's face and not understanding it. "Mrs. Vance would like her closure witnessed," Ostrander said, and there was an instruction folded inside the easy words, a "get this done and get her out of here" that I do not think Marcus heard but that I heard plainly. "She's settling the small savings account. 40 years. Sweet that she wants it proper." "Happy to," Marcus said, and he meant it, because he did not know anything yet. He came around to the customer side of nothing, settled his glasses down onto his nose, and reached for the closure form to read it the way a careful man reads before he signs his name as witness to anything. And I did the only thing I had truly come there to do. I did not pick up the pen. I slid Walt's folder across the marble under Marcus Hale's hand, and I said, quietly enough that it was only for the 3 of us, and yet not quietly at all, "You'll want to verify the account against the file first. It's all there. My husband kept very good records." Kayla smirked. I saw it out of the side of my eye, the little curl of a young woman watching a fussy old customer make her own simple errand complicated, the gum starting up again behind her teeth. And I did not mind it. I had been smirked at by experts. Dale Ostrander did not smirk. Dale Ostrander looked at the soft brown folder sliding under his branch manager's fingers and went very still, the way a man goes still when a sound he has been listening for in the dark finally comes, and the sheen at his temple became, for just a moment, a thing you could have seen from the back of the line. Marcus Hale opened the folder. He opened it the way you open anything a pleasant errand has handed you, without ceremony, expecting a passbook and a signature card, and the ordinary paper sediment of a long, ordinary account. And the first page was exactly that, and his eyes moved across it easy and unbothered. Then they reached the second line. I had placed it on top myself that morning, under the supper lamp, squared to the front of the file where a witness's eye would fall. The federal designation Walt had carried for me all these years, without my knowing it. The line that named what I had been before I was a small woman in a gray coat on Paint Street. I watched Marcus Hale's eyes stop. I watched them go back to the start of the line and travel it again, slower, the way you reread a number that cannot be right. And I watched the easy bank manager pleasantness drain out of his face from the top down, like water leaving a glass, until what stood there reading my husband's folder in the middle of that warm and ticking lobby was a man who had gone entirely white. The gum stopped, the radiators ticked. Somewhere behind me, the baby made a small sound, and the line went quiet without knowing why. The way a room goes quiet just before it understands. And Marcus Hale lifted his eyes off the page and looked at me, and his mouth opened. And for a long moment, no sound came out at all. When the sound finally came, it did not come to me. Marcus Hale was not looking at me anymore. He was looking down at the page, at the line his thumb had stopped beneath, and he read it the way a man reads a thing aloud to make himself believe his own eyes, quiet on the first word, and then clear enough to carry the length of the lobby, so the two women from the school board heard it, and the farmer in the seed cap heard it, and the young father swaying his baby at the back of the line heard it too. Account holder of record, he read. Colonel Maureen Vance, United States Army, Finance Corps, retired. I felt the room change shape around me. The farmer turned his head. One of the school board women set her zippered bag down on the marble without appearing to know she had done it. Kayla's gums stopped moving behind her teeth, and her red nails went flat and still against the counter, and that warm poured honey she had been ladling over me a moment before was simply gone, the way a smell goes when somebody opens a door on the cold. I stood where I stood in the coat they had already decided about, my hands folded one over the other, and I said nothing. There was nothing for me to say that the page was not saying better, and a long time ago the Army had taught me that silence, held steady, is its own kind of command, and a room will fall in behind it if you only let it. And then the color went out of Marcus Hale's face. I have watched it happen to a few men in my life, the actual leaving of the blood, and it is not a figure of speech. It went out of him from the hairline down, the way light leaves a field when the sun drops behind the ridge, until he was the gray of the paper in his hands. He had read one line, and he understood the whole of it, because Marcus Hale had been a soldier once, a long way back. 3 years he kept folded away and rarely opened, and a man who has stood in a dispersing line in the heat with his pay record in his fist knows exactly what a certifying officer of the Finance Corps is, and what it means when the word federal sits down next to her name on a page. He took the reading glasses off his nose. He set them on the marble beside the folder, slowly, as if they had become breakable. He came up out of the lean he had been holding over the counter, and his shoulders went back, and his chin came level. And there, in the middle of that warm and ordinary lobby on Paint Street, with the peppermint dish full, and the little flag standing in its holder, and the baby fussing softly behind me, Marcus Hale brought his heels together and raised his right hand to his brow and held it. He held it. He said nothing. There is nothing to say underneath a salute. That is the whole point of the gesture, that it carries what the mouth cannot, and he let it carry. The lobby went so still I could hear the radiators going on with their small work along the wall, and the courthouse clock striking the half-hour faint through the glass. I did not weep, though I will tell you Walt felt closer to me in that minute than he had since the box went down into the ground. I brought my own hand up the old way, the way I had not had cause to do in years, and I returned it, and then I let it fall, and I said the only thing I said in that whole bank that morning. As you were, son. He lowered his hand, and his eyes, coming down off mine, dropped back to the open folder, and they caught on the second line, the one set beneath my name, and I watched the salute drain off his face and something colder move in behind it. Federal fiduciary designation, he read, and his voice was not soft now. Active. This account is subject to Treasury dormant asset monitoring. Any closure, transfer, or sweep of these funds is to be reported to the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency within 1 business day of posting. I was not watching Marcus while he read it. I was watching Dale Ostrander, because the hands are where a man keeps the truth he is paying his face to bury, and I wanted to see it arrive in his. It arrived. The fingers that had squared my closure formed so tidily a minute before went white at the knuckle where they gripped the lip of the counter. The shine at his temple slid down past his ear in one slow line. He had stopped looking at the folder. He was looking at the blank place over my shoulder where men look when they are doing a sum they already know the answer to. And I understood that the sum in his head was not $312. It was the other figure, the big one, the hole he had been filling for years with the loose change of the recently buried, one small account at a time, and that was now going to be counted, line by line, by people who counted for the federal government. Because that is what the second line meant, and Dale Ostrander knew it before anyone else in that room drew breath. It meant that the instant his branch moved to close this account, or sweep it, or nudge it onto the books the gentle way they had nudged so many others, a notice went straight up the wire to the Comptroller of the Currency, the federal regulator whose whole business is dormant accounts and the banks that quietly help themselves. He had spent the morning coaxing a grieving widow toward a signature line. The signature line was a tripwire, and he had walked his entire branch up to it and put my own pen in my hand. Now there was the envelope. It had been clipped inside the front of the folder the whole time, and Marcus had not reached it, so I reached past his hand and took it off the clip myself. It was a plain white envelope gone soft at the corners, and across the front of it, in Walt's small square bookkeeper's hand, were the words he had written for a morning he knew was coming and did not live to see. Don't open until they say no. They had said it to me a week before, in that very spot, in a bright young voice, that this line was for real customers, and I had stood out on the cold sidewalk afterward and opened it then. But I had let no one else read it. I held it out now to Marcus Hale, and I told him, "You had best read this part out loud as well. It names the rest of them." He took it, and he read it to the lobby in a steady voice, and Walt's words filled that room the way Walt himself never would have, because he was a shy man who would have hated the eyes on him and done it anyway if it was right. The letter said he had sat in that lobby for years and watched them work, that he had heard the script with his own ears, heard a manager teach a teller to lean in close to the old and the bereaved and murmur, "We will just close the little ones for you, sweetheart, so you don't have to think about it and call it a kindness." That it was not a kindness, it was a method. He named the worn groove I had only guessed at the night before under my supper lamp. And then he named a woman. He named Ruth Henderson, who had buried her own husband 2 winters before I buried mine, and gone into that branch trusting and tired, and come out lighter, and never once known that the small accounts her husband had left her had been smoothed quietly onto the bank side of the ledger while a warm voice walked her to the door. Walt had watched it happen to Ruth and been unable to prove it, and had gone home and made certain, with the only tools a careful man owns, that it would never happen to me, and that the day they reached for mine, the reaching itself would drag the whole thing up into the light. The last line of the letter was for me alone, and Marcus read it softer. "I will give it to you the way Walt gave it to me. You were always covered, Mo. Let them read it." They had read it. And the account itself, the $312 that people in that bank had asked about more than once in that gently puzzled way, wondering aloud why an old couple kept a savings account open all those years with next to nothing in it. That account I understood at last, only when I sat with 40 years of statements spread across my kitchen table. $312, never less, which is the part not one of them ever noticed. Walt kept it at the floor on purpose, a hair above the line where a bank may close an account for sitting empty, and never a single dollar higher than it needed to be, because the federal flag he had quietly fixed to my service file rode on one thing only, and that was the account staying open. A closed account watches nothing. The right open one stands guard over the whole branch while you sleep. My Walt, my quiet railroad bookkeeper who balanced freight ledgers for 30 years and never raised his voice in his life, had built me a tripwire out of $312 and kept it armed every month to the end of his days, and never told me, because he did not want me carrying the weight of it. He only wanted me covered. Kayla had her hand pressed over her mouth. I do not believe she had truly known the shape of it. She was young, and a smiling man in a plum tie who signed her reviews had handed her a script, and she had said her lines and snapped her gum, and never once followed the words to the far end of what they actually did. I watched her look at Dale Ostrander, and I watched her understand who had put those words in her mouth, and her face, when it came apart, was not the face of a woman who had robbed anyone on purpose. It was the face of a girl learning what she had been used for. She took her hand from her mouth and said, "Very small, only to me, I'm sorry." And I told her the truest thing I know about it, which is that a person can set a thing down the same as they were handed it. Dale Ostrander said nothing at all. There was nothing left for him to perform. The smile he had practiced in a mirror for 30 years had no setting for this, and he knew that the people coming up Paint Street knew their arithmetic the way I knew mine, and you cannot pour honey over a number. He lifted his white hand off the counter and stepped back from it. And that was the whole of it. I did not need him on the floor. I had not come to put him there. I had come to set my account down in front of them one more time and let them do the very thing they had done to Ruth Henderson and to who knew how many others, where the right eyes could finally watch them do it, and they had done it, and it was watched. I reached over and took up the pen Kayla had laid out for me, the one that had been pointing at the signature line like a fork pointed at a child's plate, and I capped it, and I laid it down across the closure form where no name of mine would ever go. I gathered Walt's folder off the marble and squared its soft corners and tucked it back under my arm where it had ridden all morning. Then I pushed out through the door into the Paint Street cold, and the brass bell rang its one flat note at my back, and the account stayed open on the books of the Scioto Valley Bank and Trust, $312, precisely where my husband had left it. It did not take the federal people long. Within the week, 2 of them came up Paint Street in plain coats with file boxes under their arms and set up at the back of that same lobby, and a hold dropped onto every dormant account the branch had touched in 6 years. And the quiet little program that had been smoothing the savings of the dead onto the bank's ledger simply stopped. Because you cannot run a thing like that with the comptroller's office sitting at the back table. Dale Ostrander's shortfall came up out of the books on its own the moment somebody honest went looking, the way water finds the low spot in a floor, and he did not work there, or anywhere near there, after that. Ruth Henderson got a letter on bank paper and a check that sat her down hard at her kitchen table, and her husband's accounts went back under her name where they had belonged all along. And it was Kayla who sat across from her with the right forms and a box of tissues and put every dollar of it home. The account is still open, $312, drawing its small interest, the last thing my Walt ever balanced.